Walk County. State of Wisconsin Plaintiff versus Stephen A. Avery Defendant. Partial motion hearing. Case number 05CF381. Date August 9th, 2006. Before the Honorable Patrick L. Willis, Circuit Court Judge. Appearances. On behalf of the State of Wisconsin, Kenneth R. Kratz, Special Prosecutor, Thomas J. Fallon, Special Prosecutor. On behalf of the defendant, Dean A. Strang, Attorney at Law, Jerome F. Buting, Attorney at Law. Stephen A. Avery, Defendant, appeared in person. Partial transcript of proceedings. Witnesses: Detective Anthony O'Neill, Attorney Stephen M. Glenn, Detective Anthony O'Neill, recross examination. The court. Counsel, we were going to be taking some witnesses out of order or on a different motion. Attorney Fallon, I believe that was our intention, to take a brief hiatus from the multiple execution and do the two witnesses on the Marinette County Sheriff's statement. We have Detective O'Neill here and Anthony Glenn is here. And as the court observed the last time we were together, you have already listened to the recordings, and basically the two witnesses are here to fill in what's happened that's not on the recording, so we're not anticipating lengthy testimony. The court. Very well, and the state is going to be calling the witnesses here? Attorney Fallon. Well, we're going to call Detective O'Neill, and I believe the defense will be calling Mr. Glenn. Attorney Strang. Yes? The court. All right. Mr. Fallon, go ahead. Attorney Fallon. Very well. State at this time would call to the stand Detective O'Neill. Detective Anthony O'Neill, called as a witness herein, having been first duly sworn, was examined and testified as follows. The clerk. Please state your name, spell your last name for the record. The witness. O'Neill, O''N''E''I''L'. Direct examination by Attorney Fallon. First name? Anthony. What do you do for a living? Detective, Marinette County Sheriff's Department. How long have you been a law enforcement officer with Marinette County? Since 1989. How long have you been a detective? Since 1998. To what duties are you normally assigned as a detective with the Sheriff's Department in Marinette? General investigations. All right, and I would like to direct your attention to Saturday, November 5th, 2005. Did you have an opportunity to meet with one Stephen Avery? Yes, I did. Is Mr. Avery the one you met with? Is he present in the courtroom this afternoon? Yes, he is. And would you point out where he is seated for the benefit of the court? Seated to the right of his attorney, Mr. Strang, wearing a black short-sleeved shirt, dark-colored pants, and dark-colored shoes. The court. All right. The record will reflect that the witness identified Mr. Avery. Question by Attorney Fallon. How did it come to pass that you had contact with Mr. Avery on November 5th, 2005? My office informed me that it was requested by, Calumet County investigators that we make contact with the Avery family at their property located in Marinette County, Wisconsin, and to make contact with the Avery family and talk to them about the case that they were working on involving a missing person by the name of Teresa Halbach. All right, and approximately what time of day was that you had contact with the defendant, Stephen Avery? Actually arrived at the property proper at approximately 2 in the afternoon. When you arrived there, what was the first thing you did? Went to a smaller type cabin, knocked on the door. I believe it was Charles Avery, came to the door, came outside. I spoke to him for a few moments. Also spoke to Mr. Avery, Alan Avery, and then eventually, of course, Stephen Avery. All right, and where did you first meet Stephen Avery? It would have been in the cabin that was occupied by Mr. Avery, Mrs. Avery, and some other Avery family members. What information did you provide, or what reason did you give Mr. Avery for your wishing to speak with him? Initially, I explained to Chuck Avery that our purpose was on behalf of Calumet County investigators to speak to the Avery family, including regarding any knowledge that they may have of the whereabouts of Teresa Halbach, and that there was no indications or no purpose by law enforcement to take anybody in custody or arrest anybody, but merely to talk to them about anything they might know. Was that information you relayed that directly to the defendant, Stephen Avery? Yes, while in the cabin in the presence of his family. Was he willing to speak with you? Yes, he was. Did you, in fact, speak with him? Yes, I did. Where did that conversation take place? It took place in my unmarked car, county squad car, on the Avery property, just outside the cabin, in a driveway area of the Avery property. Was there anyone else in the vehicle when you engaged in conversation with Stephen Avery? On that Saturday, no, there was not. All right, now, on that particular day, were any of your conversations with Mr. Avery recorded? Yes. All right, tell us generally, first and foremost, was there any department policy which facilitated or suggested or directed you to record that conversation? At that time, no. Or the last time you were here, July 19th, I believe it was, did you bring with us copies of those recordings? Yes, I did. And you provided copies to myself and to the defense counsel in this case, correct? Correct. All right. Are the information which was provided to us, is that a complete copy of the recordings? Yes, it is. All right. Now, are all of your conversations with Mr. Avery, all discussions, all words spoken, recorded on those recordings? No, they are not. Attorney Fallon. All right. And just so the record is clear, I believe the court has already received its copy and has listened to them. The court. I have. I'm wondering if. Attorney Fallon. I can't remember if it was marked as an exhibit or not. That's what I'm drawing a blank on. The court. I don't believe it was. Janet, can you tell me if that's in the file somewhere? The clerk. It is in the file. Attorney Fallon. While she's checking that, let's continue, officer. Question by Attorney Fallon. Let's start with the big picture here. Approximately how much time did you spend with Mr. Avery total that day? Approximately 2 hours, 45 minutes to 3 hours. All right. Now, during that time frame, was it one continuous conversation, or were there a series of conversations? It was a continuous conversation interrupted by other events. All right. If that helps. Sure. Approximately how many interruptions occurred during the course of your contact with Mr. Avery? Maybe 3. All right. As you recall this day, do you know the reasons for those interruptions? Yes. All right. Tell us, please, the first interruption. I'm not sure where it fits in the pre-interview or during the interview, but there was a point where Mr. Avery gave consent, along with Stephen, for the search of the property and the vehicles that were contained on the property. And my attention was directed towards the Stephen Avery vehicle for a moment by an officer that was conducting the search. That may have been an interruption or may have been pre-interview. The other interruptions would have been numerous phone calls from the press to Mr. Avery and phone calls from an attorney. All right, let's start first with your initial contact in the vehicle itself. When was the recorder turned on? Was there any discussion that occurred before the recording was engaged? Yes, there was. All right, and tell us about that. I obtained some biographical data from Stephen regarding his name, his address, his date of birth, and specific information as to where he lived and so forth. And then, as he started telling me the story, at that point, I felt there was a need for me to make more of a record for myself, because it was becoming a story that was involving a lot of details, a lot of things I was not familiar with. and I needed to make sure that there was an accurate thing I could go back to later on and make sure my reports reflected what he said. Question, all right, so approximately, if we guessed, I don't want you to guess, if you were to estimate, approximately how many minutes went by before you thought to yourself, it's probably a good idea, I better start recording this, about how much time elapsed? I would say between 8 to 10 or 10 to 12 minutes. All right, now, during that particular time, other than biographical data, the details of who he is and how old he was and where he lived and worked, etc., what else was discussed that you recall? Knowing what we discussed that I know is not on the recording was, I just had a phone call, okay? And basically was not given any specific details as to what the investigation involved, so it was kind of like coming in blind. And I remember talking to Stephen, saying, here's the situation as I know it, and I think you're going to be able to tell me much more than what I know, and I'm going to rely upon you to help me through. Try to understand what this investigation is into the missing person, Teresa Halbach. All right? And I think at that point, when he started to go into talking about it, I wrote down some notes, like it was Halloween, then it was like, okay, then I flip on the recorder. So it was only from the time I collected the biographical data and that we had that conversation regarding what I was there for and trying to understand the circumstances and going from there. Okay, now, you mentioned some other interruption or something concerning consent. What was that about? I believe it may have been during the initial and not during the interview where we asked Mr. Avery if we could search the property. We had some other officers that were present and wanted to give them their tasks, with Mr. Avery's permission, to go and search the property, see if there was anything that may be pertinent that wasn't normal. All right. He gave, pardon, I just want to interrupt. Which property are you referring to? The Avery property in the town of Stevenson, Marinette County. Question, Marinette County, all right. So after that occurred, then you had this general discussion of who you were while you were there getting his biographical data. And then as the questioning begins, it's shortly thereafter, within a matter of what, a minute or two, that you decide to, I better turn on the recorder? Correct. Okay, all right. What was the next interruption? Well, strike that. Until the point of the next interruption, should I say the first interruption, was everything recording from that moment on, after you turned on the recorder? Yes. Okay. What was the first interruption then? I believe it was a phone call that was made to a family member and then presented to Stephen by someone who knocked on the door and said, hey, phone. And he says, wait a minute. And the person, I believe, said something to the effect of, it's the attorney. And at that point, Stephen, I believe, rolled down the window and took the phone. All right. And did he remain in the vehicle? Yes, he did. Now, while he was on the phone, the recording is still running? Yes, it is. All right. At some point during this interruption, was the recording turned off at all? Not until after he left the vehicle. All right. After he left the vehicle, did you turn off the recorder immediately, or did you leave it on for a few moments? I left it on for a few moments because I made a note, a verbal note, as to what was going on. All right, and at some point you turned the recorder back on. Yes, I did. With respect to that, prior to turning the recorder back on, did you have any conversation with Mr. Avery before you turned the recording back on? No, I stayed in the car. You stayed in the car? Correct. All right, so when did the recording get turned back on? When Mr. Avery came back into the car. As he opened the door? I believe so. I believe I could even hear a chime from the door in the recording. All right, and from that moment on, did the recording remain on? For that session, yes. All right, and what was the next interruption that occurred? When he came back into the car, he still had the phone. We continued on with the interview. I don't think there were any other interruptions. All right. Was there a second phone call from an attorney? Do you recall? Yes, there was. All right. Tell us about that. I believe it was somewhere closer to 4 or 5 p.m. All right. And someone said again that it was his attorney, and he said something to the effect, "Tell him I will call him back in 15 minutes. Question. And at that point, did you continue to converse with Mr. Avery? For a short time, yes. And then what happened? We concluded our interview. All right, now, did he step out and take a call from an attorney? During the first phone call interruption, yes. All right, now, when was the last time that you listened to a recording of this afternoon's conversation with Mr. Avery? Would have been in totality on the date I came here, which was July 19th. So it's been since July 19th that you listened to the recording? Actually, I think it was June 19th, wasn't it? Whenever you were here last. But you've not listened to the recording since? No, I haven't. All right, now, at any time while the recorder was off, did you have any discussions with Mr. Avery regarding the events which were unfolding in Manitowoc County about the location of Teresa Halbach's vehicle on his property that were not recorded? No, I did not. All right, now, any discussion with Mr. Avery whatsoever that were not recorded about whether he should continue to talk with you, notwithstanding the fact that he had just taken a phone call from Attorney Glenn? No. All right, so everything relative to the events which were unfolding here in Manitowoc County and the discussion regarding the fact that his attorney is trying to get a hold of him are on the recordings? To the best of my knowledge, yes. All right. During the course of the afternoon's interview, was Mr. Avery, in your mind, was he ever in custody? No. Did you tell him that he was free to leave during the course of this conversation? At least a couple times, and reaffirmed it, yes. Did you advise him during the course of these conversations that he was, of course, free to leave at any time? Yes, and he exercised those as well. As a matter of fact, he left your presence how many times? If the interruption of going out and looking at his car occurred during the interview, that would have been one. To take that phone call from his attorney would have been the second time. So, one for certain, two possibly. All right, and as a matter of fact, you actually talked to his attorney at one point during his receiving the call, correct? A person identified himself as his attorney, yes. And the person identified himself as Attorney Stephen Glenn? Correct. All right. When you completed your discussions with Mr. Avery, did you arrest or otherwise take Mr. Avery into custody? No. You wrote a report on this? Yes, I did. I'm just curious. Did you have the opportunity of listening to the recording before writing your report? Yes. All right. At any point while on the recording, the recording will speak for itself. At any point which was not recorded during your contact with Mr. Avery, did Mr. Avery tell you he just did not want to talk to you? No. At any point during your contact with Mr. Avery, and I'm focusing in on points which were not subject to recording, did he ever say he didn't want to talk to you without the assistance of counsel? No. At any point during your contact with Mr. Avery that was not recorded, did he ever refuse to answer any particular question? As related to Teresa Halbach case, no. Yes, all right. Now, during the course of this conversation, he sat in what part of your vehicle? A passenger front. All right. And is that passenger vehicle, is one able to freely get in and out of that vehicle? It's not like the back seats, for instance. It's not locked. Just as your typical civilian car, Ford Taurus. No cage, no locks, no special things to keep someone inside the car. All right. Your best recollection, is there any reason in your mind right now why it took 2 or 2.5 hours to complete the job of interviewing Mr. Avery? I believe the duration wasn't such to be sure as to what he was telling me, to expand upon what he was telling me, to grasp what he was telling me, and to be certain to myself and to him that what he was telling me was, what he said, the truth. All right, were any of the interruptions that you have just described lengthy? In other words, there was a lot of downtime where you actually turned off the tape for any extended period of time? No. During the course of taking these statements from Mr. Avery, at any point, in an effort to get him to talk to you, did you promise him anything? No. Did you at all threaten or otherwise coerce him? No. Did he make any requests of you that you denied? No. And how would you characterize his demeanor when he was speaking with you? Wanting to cooperate, wanting to talk? It was almost as if it was a casual conversation, so to speak, but yet with concern, and without any type of need to go anywhere or do anything. It was. All right. And at any point, did he become angry or frustrated with you or your questioning? No. Did he have any questions of you that are not reflected on the recording? I don't believe so, no. All right. Attorney Fallon. Ms. Clerk, do we have an exhibit number for that recording? The Clerk. It wasn't marked as an exhibit, but it was filed. Attorney Fallon. Perhaps we should have it marked. The Court. It should be marked, so can it be 21? The Clerk. Yes. Exhibit 21 marked for identification. Question by Attorney Fallon. Detective, I show you what has been marked for identification purposes as Exhibit 21. Does that look familiar to you? This actual CD? No. This is not the CD that I would have produced. Okay, you reproduced an exhibit such as this. Would that be yours? I believe so, yes. All right, as far as we know, as far as you know, this is a true and accurate copy of the original that you brought with you when you were here last? Correct. Okay. Attorney Fallon. Is there a stipulation, counsel, on that creation? Attorney Strang. Yes, and Exhibit 21 is admissible as far as I'm concerned. Attorney Fallon. Very well. We'll tender the witness for cross upon receipt of the exhibit. The Court. All right. The Court, based on the stipulation of the parties, will accept Exhibit 21. Mr. Strang, you are doing this one? Attorney Strang. Yes. Cross-examination by Attorney Strang. Question. Detective O'Neill, other than listening to the tape or the recording that we have now marked as Exhibit 21, what did you review at any time after November 5, 2005, to refresh your recollection to testify here today? My reports. How many reports are those? I believe I reviewed the report involving the interview of Stephen Avery on November 5th. I believe it was maybe 4 pages. The Court. Can you hand me the exhibit? The witness. I'm sorry? The Court. Can you hand me the exhibit, the CD? Question by Attorney Strang. Did you review any other reports? I believe I reviewed the actual motion that was presented. The defense motion? Yes, I reviewed a handwritten note regarding sometimes your handwritten, some biographical data. Your handwritten notes? Yes. Prepared on November 5? Yes. During the interview with Stephen Avery? Yes. Do you have those with you? May I check? Yes. No, I do not. Where are they? Actually, I believe they may be in my car, which is nearby, obviously. Correct. All right. We'll find a convenient time to have you get those. Attorney Strang. Simply signal the court now that I'm asking for them under 906.12. Question by Attorney Strang. What else did you review? We've gone through the tape, the motion that I filed, one report, which you recall as being 4 pages, and then your handwritten notes. The The audio recordings from my first appearance here, I would have reviewed back then. Audio recordings from your first appearance here, I'm not sure I understand. When I first came, I think it was on June 19th. I believe that was the first day of motions. July 5th, the day I would have appeared but not presented them for motion. I would have reviewed also the audio recordings and the diagrams and the statements that were taken. Okay, so the same things you reviewed. When you say audio recordings, you are talking about the November 5 interview of Steve Avery? And 6th, yes. And 6, okay. Separate recording? Yes. All right, separate report for November 6th as well? I believe so, yes. Did you review that to refresh your recollection to testify? I don't believe so. I'm going to show you 2 reports. Before I mark these, I'm going to show you 2 reports. Tell me if both of these reports that you author are, tell me if both of those are reports that you authored. Which one did you review to refresh your recollection, or do you now think you looked at both of them, having seen them? I would have reviewed the report dated 11/16 of 05, and not the report dated 11/17 of 05? I don't believe so. Okay, fair enough. I'm going to mark the one you identified as reviewing that, and ask the clerk to mark that as Exhibit 22. What I will do, I will leave this with you. Exhibit 22, marked for identification. Attorney Strang. I'm not moving it into evidence at this point, Your Honor. Question by Attorney Strang. That report, to my eye, is 5 pages, not 4. Is that right? Correct. And then there's a 6th page, which looks like, somebody's hand-drawn diagram. Attachment of a diagram, yes. Right. On the 5th of the type pages, we have got your signature near the bottom. Yes, it is. I see 4 little computer symbols for a speaker. Do you see those? Yes, I do. Any significance to the symbol? When I compiled these reports and presented them to the Calumet County officers, I did so not only in written format, but also in CD-ROM format. And that CD-ROM would have allowed the user to click on the icons that are there to access whatever audio recordings were pertinent to that specific report. Okay, and that goes to my next question. There are 4 of the icons. Does that correspond to 4 parts or segments on the CD of the November 5 interview with Stephen Avery? Without actually seeing the CD-ROM and looking at that property for the icons, I would say yes. And that would be your expectation? Yes. In other words, all right. You did not tell Stephen Avery during the course of your November 5 interview that you were recording it, true? True. Where was the recorder in the unmarked squad you described? Where I always keep it, on my visor. There's kind of like a visor caddy in that location right there. Sort of a small dictaphone or digital handheld recorder? Yes. Which you can simply turn on with your thumb by reaching up to the visor? Yes. Do that unobtrusively? To someone that may be in the vehicle, it may be unobtrusively, yes. Sure. And then turn it off with your thumb as well, correct? Correct. That is something you have grown accustomed to doing? During my career, no. But more recently, yes. As of November 5, 2005, were you adept at turning this recorder on and off quickly without looking? I probably would have had to take it down to turn it on because I'm not that adept, okay? All right, in any event, you had no reason to believe that Mr. Avery knew that he was being recorded? No. The initial phase, if you will, of this interview involved what I think you said was about 8 to 12 minutes, give or take, of getting some biographical information from Stephen Avery, true? Yes. What did he tell you about his level of formal education? I believe that was part of our conversation. He talked about not having completed high school. And going no further? I believe that to be correct, yes. Would your notes out in your car reflect some of these biographical details? That was just during conversation, and I really don't know. Did you make most of the notes before you turned on the recorder for the first time? I believe so. Which is also the period of time during which you covered the biographical information. Correct? So, what you knew, in any event, was that you had a high school graduate in the car with you? I don't believe he graduated high school. I don't think he did. I'm sorry, I misunderstood you. I don't believe he did graduate high school. What was your understanding of his educational attainment? I believe, just from our conversation, I don't believe he graduated high school because I talked about some familiar surroundings and things and so forth. You didn't learn how far short of graduation he left high school? No, I didn't. But you knew he did not have a high school graduate? I believe that's correct. That was your understanding? Yes. Okay. Did you inquire into the manner of his employment, his trade, or his job? I believe during conversation it became known that it was a family-run business, the Avery salvage yard. Worked in the salvage yard? Correct. You would describe him then as a working man? Correct, yes. Someone who did not have post-secondary education? I believe so, correct. Someone who believed not to have a high school degree? Correct. So, at least the man you believed you were speaking to, his highest diploma would have been from 8th grade, presumably, correct? From what grade? 8th. I can't remember that. I don't remember that. Okay, but no reason to think he had graduated from 12th grade. I was surprised that you said 8th grade because I put him in the idea of his cognitive abilities to understand me as being a lot higher than an 8th grade education. I understand. What I was talking about was the last diploma that you believed he had received, or the last stage of schooling he had completed. Would have been junior high school. I don't recall that being something that we talked about. All right. The interview was one of many interviews that you have conducted with people during, at that point, roughly 16 years you have been in law enforcement? Yes. Probably hundreds of interviews you have conducted with citizens during those 16 years, roughly? Yes. I'm talking about 1989 to November of 2005. In some sort and fashion, yes. Sure. And then in about 1999, you took on the duties of an investigator? I believe it was 98. 98, I'm sorry. So, it had been about 7 years that you had been an investigator by the time you were conducting this interview? Yes. The job of investigator regularly entails interviewing citizens? Yes. Some of those citizens are witnesses to crimes or potential crimes? Yes. Some are victims of crimes? Yes. Some are suspects in crimes? Yes. Some are actually defendants charged with a crime. Usually at that point, I'm not talking to them. But occasionally, there have been occasions where somebody has been charged with a crime, later has talked to you about that charge or some other, yes, matter of interest, correct? Correct. So you have acquired experience dealing with all types of these categories of citizen interviews that we have discussed? Yes, sir. You have done that probably hundreds of times during your employment as a detective? To some degree, yes. You've been trained from the beginning of your law enforcement career that one in this country always has a right to ask for a lawyer? Yes. One doesn't need to be a suspect. Correct. One doesn't need to be under arrest. Correct. You are a scrupulous law enforcement officer? Depends on how you define scrupulous. How do you define scrupulous? One who takes his job serious and exemplifies what you would expect in a law enforcement officer. All right. Does that include honesty? Yes. Does that include respect for constitutional rights? Yes. Does that include respect for the human beings with whom you have contact professionally? Yes. That respect extends to respecting a request for a lawyer? Very much so. Doesn't matter to you whether the person is in custody or not? Correct. If he asks for a lawyer, that's his wish? That's his wish. That's something that you will respect? Always have. As part of a serious and responsible law enforcement officer? Yes. You are familiar, as a matter of experience, with the fact that people have all different states of mind when you come to interview them. By that, I mean some are relaxed, correct? Correct. Some are friendly? Correct. Some are sober? Correct. Some are not under the influence of drugs? That's correct. And then some are hostile? Correct. Some are drunk? Correct. Some are under the influence of some sort of drug or illegal substance? Correct. Some are scared? Correct. Some are highly formal? Correct. Some want to be informal and jovial, or try to play the joker, if you will. I imagine so, yes. You have seen the gamut, in other words, of human behavior in the course of interviewing people? Yes, I have. This one, Mr. Avery, was somebody who appeared to you to want to be cooperative? Yes. Your experience, too, with the hundreds of people you have interviewed in various descriptions we have covered. You have seen a range of levels in facility with the English language. I guess we could put it that way, couldn't we? Including my own, yes. Yeah, sure. I mean, you're at one point on the scale of, from inarticulate or illiterate to highly articulate, correct? I would hope so. Sure. You're at some point in there, and you've seen people who range pretty well across that spectrum? Yes. You have had people, in fact, who are mute or, because deaf, are not able to speak ordinarily at all? I can't recall any. I'm not sure. But I'm sure. Yeah, and you have certainly interviewed people as to whom you understood that perhaps Spanish was their first language and English only a second and fragmentary language? Yes. You've had people who had college degrees or maybe degrees beyond that and had an excellent grasp of the English language. You have interviewed people like that? Yes, I have. And you have interviewed simple, ordinary folks who have maybe less ability to articulate their thoughts than you do, for example? Yes. Mr. Avery would fall into the group who would be, less articulate than you, correct? I don't believe so. Somewhere about you, in terms of his ability to articulate himself in English? To a certain degree, yes. All right, but I guess the point is, you have learned to deal with the range of English language skills in your work? Yes. You, therefore, do not hold people to a dictionary standard of use of the language? No. You don't correct their grammar? No. You don't correct their diction? No. You don't ask them to speak with precise phrases or specific magic words? Unless there is a problem in me understanding what they are saying? No. In which case, you will try to clarify so that you could understand? Correct. But you allow some room for communicating with the interviewee at the level that the interviewee communicates? As long as we are both understanding each other and we have the same presence of the language, sure, that we're speaking. And that is the key. You want to make sure you understand, project, and receive the same language. Right, and that. So if someone was using a very elevated vocabulary, words you didn't understand, you might ask that person to explain in simpler terms? As we have done, yes. Sure, and likewise, if someone was using very imprecise or poorly chosen words, you might try to clarify what they were trying to tell you as well. Correct. There are no magic words, in other words, in your business here. The point is to communicate. That's correct. And to be fair in taking down what you believe the person to mean. Taking down? Well, Recording, writing, taking in, perceiving on your part. You want to understand the person, in other words. During conversation, yes, I do. Taking down what I take down, if you're referring to notes or anything like that, would be points that I feel important to capture the moment. Yeah, fair enough. And I sort of sent you off in that direction. Answer, I was trying to make a transition of work. Sure, but initially in conversation, you want to understand them? Yes. You want to understand them accurately? Yes. That's part of doing your job fairly? Yes. And then if you can write something down, then you may hone in to clarify or just make quite certain that you have got an accurate description of what the person is saying. Okay, I think you kind of lose me there. If I had a problem with what you're trying to say to me, I might not necessarily write it down. I might ask you to clarify or ask you another question that may clarify it anyhow. You understood me perfectly. That's fine. The report that we have marked as Exhibit 22 actually bears a date, as you noted, 11 days after the interview of Mr. Avery. It does bear that date, yes. Okay, and I'm not familiar with your department, so my question is, when will you have first prepared the report marked Exhibit 22? I really can't say, except it may have been a work in progress, and the date of 11/16/05 would have been the date that I printed this out upon completing it. So sometime before, on or before November 16. Let's back into it that way then, okay? We'll use your date, 11/16/05, would have been the date you actually printed the report? Correct. You would have printed it after reviewing it? Yes. Is that true? I would hope to believe so, yes. Okay. You don't remember specifically this report? I reviewed it, but to review it upon being done with it and saying, okay, I need to review it, make sure it's correct. I'm sure it was done over a period of time, with reviews done intermittently and in a final review. And that's what you recall doing as to Exhibit 22? I believe so, because I think I do this with every report that I make. That's a habit of yours? Yes. All right, I'm less worried now about the actual date, but do you know how the report would have come into being, in a sense? Would you have typed it at a computer? Would you have dictated it, handwritten, and had somebody type it? How would it have come into being initially? I would have typed it. Yourself? Yes. Okay, and then when you told me it was a work in progress, perhaps you may have revised it over the course of 11 days? Or stopped it, got back to it, stopped it, got back to it. Usually revisions I want to do before I get done with my session. Using the tape that you made on November 5 to help you in preparing the report and typing it? Yes, to some extent. Were you satisfied when you printed the report on November 16, 2005, that the report was complete? I believe so, yes. Were you satisfied that it was accurate? To the extent that a report can be, yes. Were you satisfied that it was fair? Depending on what fair is. Well, fair to you. Were you satisfied that it was fair? A fair summary of what occurred during the day that we have a report on. All right, now, paragraph 4, Attorney Strang. And I think I'm getting into this, so I will offer Exhibit 22 at this point, Your Honor. Attorney Fallon, no objection. The court. All right. Exhibit 22 is admitted. You don't have an extra copy of that? Attorney Strang. I do. Attorney Fallon. There should be one attached to the motion, Judge, if you have it. Attorney Strang. I have an extra. The court. The motion is in the file, so I think I will just take this. Question by Attorney Strang. Exhibit 22. I'm looking at page 4, Mr. O'Neill. Do you have that? Answer. Yes, I do. Question. Okay. And down at the bottom right, just a cross-check here, it should say State 0148. Yes, it does. Okay, thank you. Attorney Fallon. Counsel, you might want to clarify how that number got on the exhibit, 0148. Attorney Strang. I would be testifying, but I would be happy to do it. It's a number that was added by the paralegal service that we're using to compile discovery and keep it organized. Attorney Fallon. So that wasn't part of, the point is that wasn't part of the original report. Question by Attorney Strang. It was not part of your original report, that number on the bottom right? No, I have seen those numbers used before, and it's usually at the level of the attorneys that are discovery. Yeah. Attorney Fallon. Thank you. Question. This otherwise looks like content that you put in the report, correct? Yes, sir, it does. All right. Down on the last paragraph on page 4, you write, Stephen returned to my car stating, and then you put in quotes, I guess they don't want me to talk no more. Close quote. Period. Do you see that? Yes, I do. And then you go on to say, I asked Stephen if that was his wishes, that he didn't want to talk to me anymore. And he replied, then you have another quote from Mr. Avery? Correct. The quotes were taken from the tape or the recording, correct? I believe so, yes. I'm not going to play the tape because you have listened to it, and the court can listen to it. But if you ask Mr. Avery after he said, well, I guess they don't want me to talk no more, and if you asked him, you don't? You didn't include that in the report, did you? If it's on the audio and it's not in the report, that would be correct. That's right. And if the audio reflects that Mr. Avery then said, no, but here's his number. In case you want to talk to me, contact them, and they want to be there too. That's not something you included in the report either, is it? That they want to be there too? I don't recall that. You certainly didn't put it in your report. Correct. And then you're saying, okay, that's not in your report. The report is reflective of that paragraph. And it doesn't have you saying, okay, that's correct. If the tape then records you at that point saying, let me ask you this, Steve, although they are telling you that they don't want you to talk, and you go on from there, that's not something you put in the report either. That's correct. If Stephen then responds to your question about whether it was his wish to talk or not talk by saying, well, I got to listen to my lawyer, that's not something you include in the report, is it? If that's what the tape reflects, my report does not reflect that. And then if you said, well, and we're not talking about you committing any crime, and you go on to talk about this just being a missing person, you didn't include that in the report, did you? No, I didn't. And then you, as I understood the report, and you may remember this, did you say, so in the interest of a missing person, last being seen by you, that we're aware of, and trying to figure out where this person may be, am I understanding you correctly in the idea that you could help in this investigation to find this missing person, that you are refusing to cooperate because your attorney is telling you not to talk to us? Do you recall making that statement at this point in the conversation with Stephen Avery? If your quote is from the recording, I would say yes. Okay, and Stephen Avery says, oh, no. Do you recall him responding that way? Again, yes. And then, and here I'm not quoting you. I'm not suggesting this is verbatim, but do you recall going on to tell Mr. Avery, look, you're a 40-plus-year-old man. You're an intelligent guy. If you have nothing to fear, do you want to finish this conversation? That's not verbatim, but words to that effect. I believe it's a fair representation of what was on the recording, yes. Okay, and somewhere after that point, Mr. Avery says, and I quote, we can talk a little longer, close quote. And then he says, very shortly after that, I want to help. Do you recall that? With a little bit more detail to the quote, I believe it was, if it's easy as well, as long as it's easy. He goes on to make the comment about it being as long as it's easy. Correct, that's right. And that's where you pick up in the report Well, as long as it's easy and whatever I know, we can. Correct. Okay. Now, this may have gotten lost somewhere in the direct examination by Mr. Fallon, but I believe there was a time when you accepted the telephone from Mr. Avery, correct? Yes. And Steve says something to you like, hang on, and then just hands you the cell phone? When he returns back to the vehicle, yes. This is shortly after he returns to the car on one of the occasions. And at that point, you talk to the voice on the other end of the phone? Correct. The person on the other end of the phone identified himself as a lawyer? Yes, he did. Gave you his name? Yes, he did. Gave the name Stephen Glenn? Yes, he did. Was that a name you recognized as a criminal defense lawyer in the state of Wisconsin? No. Okay, didn't know the name at all? Rang no bells. Okay, fair enough. And you had no reason to doubt that the person was a lawyer? No, I didn't. He identified himself specifically as representing Stephen Avery? In a civil matter, yes. In a presently pending civil matter? Yes. What else did he tell you about his representation? Besides being in Madison, and what you just said, nothing more than as far as representation. I'm sorry, you made a reference to Madison. Yeah, that he was from Madison. Milwaukee, perhaps? I thought it was Madison. That's your recollection? Yes. Okay, you did not, in the report marked as Exhibit 22, write down the details of your conversation with the lawyer on the telephone? No. Neither were you able to record the conversation with the lawyer because the lawyer was on Mr. Avery's cell phone? I believe the recording reflects some of the conversation that you can hear. Your end of it? You may even also catch a little bit what Mr. Glenn was saying as well, because of the proximity of the phone to the recorder, I think. Right. I thought I heard that too. And to me, if you've ever watched those old Charlie Brown cartoons when Lucy's mother, the school teacher, is talking kind of wah, 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 attorney demonstrates, that sort of thing, I'm sure Mr. Glenn would probably not agree. Question. Mr. Glenn probably will not agree with that. In other words, I couldn't make out his words, but I, like you, heard something that sounded like your recorder was actually picking up a voice off the cell phone. Yes, sir. Could you make out on your tape what Mr. Glenn was saying? From my recollection, I think I might have made out his name, because I remember writing down his name on the note, as well as the phone number. Right, and if this will help refresh your recollection, you are audible on the tape asking him to spell his name, and you are sort of under your breath saying, why, and that kind of thing. But in the meantime, you don't have Mr. Glenn's voice recorded on there. No. And you've had nothing available to you with which to refresh your recollection about your conversation with Mr. Glenn that day? Besides writing down his name on my notes at the time? No. Okay, as far as you know, that's the only time in your life you have spoken to Steve Glenn? Yes, as far as I know, from my recollection. Okay, what I would like to do, actually, I have one last sort of stray question. That was just a follow-up to Mr. Fallon's inquiry. I didn't have this verbatim in mind anymore, but he asked you a question, something like, was there any question that Stephen Avery refused to answer? And you paused for a little bit, and then said something like that Mr. Avery never refused to answer a question relating to Teresa Halbach. And that struck me as a qualification. Was there any other area not relating to Teresa Halbach that Mr. Avery had not wanted to discuss with you? Yes. What was that? I believe in our general conversation, when he was explaining to me his fiancée, and that he had a problem or issue, or what her issue was, that she was incarcerated. And something to the extent of, she was curious of this, but then, and it's like, well, he didn't want to get into that. And I said, very well. So in answer to his question, going back through that day, it gave me a little pause. But yet, I at least wanted to make it known that That was the only time that I could recall that he took us off the subject of that and moved on to whatever else. Okay, and it's not that Mr. Avery specifically or expressly told you, I don't want to talk about my fiancé, is it? No, not at all. You just sensed he was uncomfortable? Correct. You read him as being reluctant to talk about that? As he acknowledged that part, and he acknowledged that part. So you respected that wish not to discuss his fiancé? It wasn't the fiancé part, it was a different part, relating to her being in custody and what the situation was that brought her there. Sure, but in any event, you respected that wish not to talk about that? As part of our communication of understanding each other, yes. And you moved on? Right. To another subject right away? Yes. Attorney Strang. Okay, what I would like to do, I'm done. I would like to pass the witness back, Your Honor. But then, rather than releasing him, I would like to have him run out to his car, get his notes. Maybe somebody here can make some copies. And then I will take a look at those during or after we're done with Mr. Glenn. And if we need to recall Detective O'Neill, that would be my suggestion for the most efficient way to go. The court. All right, well, when this witness is done here, we'll let him get his notes while we get started with Mr. Glenn. Mr. Fallon, any redirect? Attorney Fallon. Just a couple questions, Judge. Thank you. Redirect examination by Attorney Fallon. Question. There was a line of questioning by counsel respecting the rights of other individuals, including the right to a lawyer. Do you remember that line of questioning? Yes. And when you were asked the question, well, it doesn't even matter if the person is in custody or not. Do you recall that question? Yes. All right. Now, in terms of one's Fifth Amendment right to counsel, does it matter if that right exists, if they were in custody or not? If I may, with my understanding, if a person is not in custody, not under arrest, free to leave any time, don't have to answer any questions, didn't ask for an attorney, or if he did ask for an attorney, I would honor that by any means possible. Well, maybe we'll ask the question this way. In your mind, does his comment, words to the effect, I guess they don't want me to talk no more, did you take that as a request for counsel? Unequivocally, no. Doesn't even mention counsel in there, does it? No. Doesn't mention the word attorney, does it? No. And on the tape, it doesn't mention, when he comes back, he doesn't mention attorney, right? No. All right. Attorney Fallon. I'm not going to ask any more questions. Let's move on. All right. Mr. O'Neill, you are excused to go to your vehicle and bring your report back at this time. The witness. Thank you, Your Honor. The court. Mr. Fallon, does the state has no further witnesses on this motion? Attorney Fallon. No, Your Honor. With the receipt of the tape, which I think speaks for itself, and the testimony, he was the only law enforcement officer associated with that contact on that day, so I believe that is the basis. The court. I don't mean to make you feel bad. It doesn't bother me that you don't have any other witnesses. I just want to make sure I understand. Attorney Fallon. That's the basis of their motion, is that day of that interview. The court. All right, Mr. Strang, I understand the defense has a witness.